Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Channel Show. So I didn't feel like putting on the spare jersey, the black one, but I'm wearing Katie's, fitting for Halloween, fitting for October. I'm still wearing the earrings, so we're still in theme. So as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, this is just taking another look at Fable versus Storygraph. These are the main two reading tracker apps that I use, and I just wanted to give another look now that it's been a little bit longer that I've been using Fable. I think about 10 months, give or take. And then over a year with at least, like at minimum, a year with using the Storygraph app. So I'll say this at the end, but let me know which one you prefer down in the comments, or if there's another reading tracker app that you prefer, let me know. I'm probably just going to stick with the Storygraph and Fable, but I wanted to take a look, kind of just to compare, contrast again, just another little check-in like I think I said. So as with my usual videos, I have my Storygraph, my Fable down below in the description. I have my handle for the Storygraph down below in the description, and then the link for my Fable is down below in the description. Now, I did have to re-record this video because I realized I kind of goofed a little bit on the editing. I have kind of been doing what I've been referring to as like low-key editing, where I take out any like major pauses or breaths near the beginning and the end of the video. But just with like time constraints and with the technology I have, I'm not sure what I have. The iPhone 16. Let's see, what version is this? What computer is this? Let's see. It's a MacBook Air, 13 inches. It's a few years old. Actually, I think it's at least 5 years old. So, like 4 to 5 years old. So, it's not fully up to date, which is why I've been doing a lot of my editing on my phone. Or I've had to do a lot of the editing on my phone because it is what it is, and I don't really have money to get an updated computer or more specialized editing tools. So I'm just working with what I got. One moment. So as usual with my more talky videos, I do have some links down below in the description that you can look into. I have the first two links are Reddit links, which I'm going to be reacting to once I give my personal spiel, my personal thoughts and opinions. And then I'll go through the two Reddit links, and then there are 3 other links. The first of the non-Reddit ones is Clash of the Book apps, Goodreads, Fable, Storygraph, and Uncover. And then best platforms for tracking reading, Goodreads versus Fable versus Storygraph. And then Fable's reading summary features racism and probably AI. So that one was, I did read through that one, that last one. And that was an issue that I'm pretty sure was resolved, and I think resolved in a positive way. So that is one to look into. And I'm not including it to be like spiteful or petty. I'm just including it because it's something we need to be aware of. So it's not something, even if it was resolved, it's not something to just glaze over or forget. So that's something to look into. But anyway, so personally, one second. Sorry, I keep saying one sec. I had to step out again. But I'm going to go over the pros for both of these. I'm not going to go over the cons because at the end of the day, like, reading trackers are reading trackers are reading trackers. And whatever's helping you read more and keep track of your reading and helping you find new books, at the end of the day, that's, I think, the most important thing, no matter what reading tracker you're using. So first thing, I'm going to go over like the pros of Fable, and these are pros without paying. Like, so you, like, these are the pros that I find with that you get without a subscription. I don't have a subscription for either of these because at the end of the day, like, I'm happy with my use for both of these apps, and like, I don't see much of a reason to pay more at this time for either of them, for a more premium subscription to them or a more premium plan. So for Fable, the pros, the first one is that there are book clubs, and on the Storygraph you can buddy read. I'm going to go over 4 for each, but there are more, but I'm just focusing on 4 that I find the most useful, and this is specifically for reading. I know Fable also has like TV shows and like TV show options, but I'm mainly focusing on the reading aspect of it and that side of the discussion. Sorry, I keep pausing because I have to keep stepping away. But for Fable, the first one is book clubs. For the Storygraph, that there are buddy reads. One second, I need to fix the camera. There we go. That's a little better. Maybe it's just me, but anyway. So with Storygraph, there are buddy reads, but there aren't necessarily book clubs. I'm not a big book club person, but if book clubs are your thing, like, Fable is the place to turn to, and they also have like TV show clubs. So it's like, Fable is the place to turn to if you're more of like a book club social person. Like, it is more of like a social media side of a reading tracker. It's more heavily influenced by the social media aspect of being a reading tracker rather than just simply being a reading tracker. So the second pro is that there is the daily reading tracker where you can check in daily, said like, I read today. You can track your progress like you can with most reading apps, but you can mention that you read it daily without necessarily having to update how much you read each day, which I find useful because it's like, I remember when I was using mostly Goodreads, I would get so fixated on updating every day, and as I transitioned over to Storygraph app, I would get so fixated on updating every single day that it like, or updating like my progress every single day, where it's like, even if I read, maybe I just listened to like 5 minutes, or maybe I just read a page, you know, where it's like, it's not a serious enough dent where it's like, okay, I read page 38. It's not a serious enough dent when my last update was like 37, you know, or the day before I read up to 37, but the next day I only read 38, that kind of a thing. So it's like, you can just check off in Fable, you can just check off, I read today. And you can include your page number, your percentage, minutes listened, well, mainly page number, percentage. And honestly, like, I do find that useful because sometimes, like I said, I'm not reading a whole lot every single day. Sometimes I'm just reading a page, and that's not going to be the hugest dent. Sometimes I've only listened to 5 minutes, and again, that might not be like a huge update. Sorry about that. I meant to start playing and then I paused the recording again. Well, this has gone down quickly, so we're just giving up on it. So the next one, I forgot that I had added this in here, but into the pros. Did I say 4 earlier? I meant to say 5 for each. The next one is, it is more community or post based, so you can find people and discuss with people what you liked about a book, what you didn't like about a book, where it's like, in the Storygraph app, you can see anyone you're friends with, who you're following, you can see their updates, but it's not really like engagement based. You're just saying engagement based. You're just seeing their updates. So this one is more community post engagement based. Why I mentioned it was more on the social media side of it. So there's that. The next one is, the fourth pro is that there are more in-depth star ratings. What I mean by this, it is still a 5-star based system, but there are different things that you have your general rating of the book, and then there are also like kind of subcategories of the book that you can rate. So like writing style, structure, characters, setting, there's all that you can rate. Whereas like with the Storygraph, you can mention if it was atmospheric, or if the characters had growth, or the pace, but it's like with this you can like rate it based off of that, which on the one hand I like, but at the same time I'm not quite sure how much I like it, just because again it's like 5-star. It's more so based off of like the 5 stars, and that is very limiting and also very subjective. So the last pro for Fable, again this has all been without paying, the last pro is that you can add, when you're doing your review, like you do the rating and then the next step is like to choose an emoji based on how you feel, and also based on how the book made you feel. And also if it's a romance book, or if it's a romance book, you can put the level of spice based on an emoji. So like there's the pink sparkle heart, which is like no spice, and then there's like an emoji for very little spice or like closed door, and then there's like obvious spice and then a lot of spice. So you can do emojis based off of that, which I appreciate, because you know you get a little bit, like even if you don't include a review, you get a little bit of a better understanding with like emojis. So anyway, moving on to the Storygraph Pros without paying. The first one is that it does have more diverse reading challenges, where you have your yearly reading challenge, but there's also like an alphabet one where it's like read a book from each letter of the alphabet, or read a book from, or it's like a colors one where it's like read a book from each color of the rainbow, or that has a read a book whose cover is like a certain color of the rainbow, or read a book with it'll be certain prompts, or like whatever it is, you know, or like it will be a covers prompt where it's like read a book that has flowers on the cover, read a book that has green on the cover, read a book that has a person on the cover, that kind of thing. There are more diverse reading challenges that you can opt in for. So I really like that, because it's like, it's not just, you're not doing it based on just trying to get a reading goal. It's like also encouraging you to try to read more off of your shelf or borrow from your local library. So I really like that. The next one is you can see a good amount of the reading sets. Again, this is without paying. Like I can see how many books I've read in a certain month. I can see what portion of that were audio to physical to ebook, what portion of that were under 300 pages, and then I think it's like 301 to like 499, and then it's like 500 plus. And then I can also see like how often I was reading, or like how often I was like updating. I update my progress like on a weekly basis on the Storygraph app. So like every Friday I'll update what page I'm at, what minutes I'm at for audiobooks. So it's like you can see kind of when you were updating, when you were reading. With those stats, I don't rely too heavily on those, because again, I do update weekly rather than daily for specific percentages through books. But you do get a good amount of reading stats. And then you also can see, like, I know Fable has this chart too, where it's like they have like the authors chart, like your most read authors for a specific month or for that year, and you can go in and see what books were by that author, because there are some books where I'm like, who is that author, where it's like I'm not fully paying attention to the author in the moment. And then I can go in the Storygraph app, I can go in and click on that author part of the charts, and it's like, oh, that was the author for Yashahime volumes 5, 6, and 7. Okay. Or, oh, that was the author for such and such book. So it's like, it's useful to be able to go in and see where certain authors factored in for certain books to be such a high ranking. And you can also see the books you've read for the year. Like I know Fable has like the different lists, and you can go in and see what books you've read. But it's really nice being able to zero in on a specific year or specific month for seeing what books you've read and seeing those specific stats. And like kind of on the same track as the author thing, the Storygraph also allows you to see like this specific genres, where it's like Fable will show you the genres, but you can't like click in and see what books are what. Like there are a lot of books on my shelf that I would categorize as like fantasy, and some of them are fantasy, but like there are some where it's like I wouldn't have thought of them as like YA, but they were kind of more YA fantasy. and there were some that were more sci-fi that I wouldn't have expected to be sci-fi, you know, that kind of thing. So it's like being able to go in and click to see what books are under what genre, that's really helpful too. So being able to see a good amount of the stats and being able to see what books factored into certain stats is also really helpful. So whereas like Fable just shows you the stats. Again, I don't know if paying for Fable, if you'd be able to see what would factor into certain stats, certain statistics, but without paying like Fable, you just see the statistics. You can't like go in and analyze like what books are what authors are where, you know. So the third pro is that you can go through read lists by month. Now this is kind of like the statistic thing where it's like I can go into like my yearly challenge for 2025 and I can like, so in the app it's like the little pie chart with like a quarter missing from it, and so I can go into that and it'll show me 2025. Just right off the bat it'll show me 2025, and then I can go in, I can select January, I can select February, I can select March, and I can see those individual statistics and go back to them to just kind of like compare, you know. So I like how I can do that. And then the fourth one second while I grab some books. Now, the fourth one is something that I really like about the Storygraph. Is that if there is a book that you're not finding in the system, you can add it or request to import it. Now, sometimes it may not sometimes when you're searching up something, it may not register immediately. And then when you try to import it, it's like, oh, we had that, here it is. So that's what the Storygraph, you can add and import books that the system doesn't have. Like with, for example, Magic Knight Wraith. This was already in, this is part 1, volumes 1 through 3. This was already in the Storygraph. And like these editions were already in the Storygraph. With Fable, I think that they only had this one and then like other editions of volume 1, part 1. And then they had a bunch of editions of part 2 volume 1, but they didn't have volumes 2 or 3 of part 1, and then they didn't have volumes 2 or 3 of part 2. So it's like I'm 4 books behind in the Fable reading track, or at least for my yearly reading goal, it's going to be counting 4 books behind what I'm actually at, because it didn't have these 3 books on top of like another one. I'm going to stick that right there for right now. Now this book, this is an example. I did not add this to the Storygraph, but another user did. Another user had added this to the Storygraph app, and this was not in. There was like other editions of Grimm's Fairy Tales, in the Fable app, but this was not in. There were other editions of this in Fable, but this one specifically was not in there, and I'm kind of like, I try to be a purist when I'm tracking my reading and with what I'm marking as currently reading and then read. Like, I'm a little bit of a purist. I like marking the ones that I've actually read, the editions that I've actually read. Unless like I really can't find that specific edition, but they have other versions. But this one, like in comparison to so many other editions, this one is really rather small in comparison. I had another edition for a while that was like much thicker. It was like, geez, I can't do hands right now. It was like that much thicker than this book, and like a bit taller too. So it's like a lot of these stories were expanded on, and so like a lot of the stories were expanded on, and there were a lot more stories in that other version that were not in this. So that's kind of why like I'm a little bit of a purist when it comes to selecting which books I'm currently reading. And of course it falls. There we go. So it's like, especially with like some of the older classics that are multiple other editions out there, that it's like, I like to select which book I'm actually currently reading, or which version I'm actually currently reading, and that's why I like the Storygraph, because even if it's not in there, you can add it to the Storygraph. And it'll say if it's user added or not, but you can still add it, you know. And then the very last pro is that you can do different book formats. Just like you can do different editions, you can do different book formats. I can distinguish I mentioned this when I was talking about like the reading sets, but I can distinguish between ebook, audiobook, and physical book, which is so helpful because it's like I 100% am behind the argument that audiobooks count as reading and ebooks count as reading. Like if you're reading, you're reading. It doesn't matter if you're listening to it in headphones from your phone, or reading it on a screen, or flipping through physical pages. If you're reading something, you're reading it. It doesn't matter how. And saying that certain formats don't count as reading is very ableist. So being able to do, with that said, for me at least, I'm very kind of specific with how I read. Like if I am reading an audiobook, I'm not going to say that I was like reading a physical book. I was reading, but I wasn't reading a physical book. I was reading the audiobook. And because of that, I don't want to input that as a physical book in my reading tracker app. And also too, it factors into like the statistics. But I don't want to like factor in like, I don't want to factor a book in as a physical book when it was an audiobook, or vice versa. Or if it's like an ebook, you know. So that is my dealio with that. And those are the pros for both of them. And at the end of the day, I think they're both super useful, paid or unpaid, for like premium. So that's my thing. So I will say, before I continue to the Reddit threads, is that I have stopped using Goodreads. And I think I'm not quite sure when I officially stopped, but I think I stopped maybe 2020. It was somewhere between 2022 and 2023 that I like started weaning off of Goodreads and fully stopped. And a large part of that was because I was finding a lot more use with the Storygraph. And also too, we don't like Amazon. Sometimes it's necessary, but we don't like Amazon. So the first Reddit thread, to move on, the first Reddit thread is book tracking apps thinking of switching to Fable. This is from about a year ago. This person says, I've used Goodreads for probably 10 years, but there are two big issues I have with it, and I know that there's at least one thing they don't plan on changing. One, use of half stars. I know it would be a programming nightmare when there are millions of whole star ratings out now. So that is a moot point, but it would still be awesome. That's something that's available in both the Storygraph and Fable. And two, being able to filter through my TBR when I'm at a store or library and I'm searching for something to read in a specific genre. I haven't personally tried this with either, but based on what I've said and my ease of access, for my ease of use for both of these apps, I would say that's probably easier on the Storygraph app than Fable. But again, I haven't really tried that feature, genre specific, so I don't know how useful the fantasy would be for the Storygraph app, but I don't think it would be as useful for like a TBR pile. I don't think it's as useful for in Fable, but I could be wrong. Wrong link. So there we are. So I found an app called Fable recently, and it does both of these things, as well as provide some pretty cool stats, average rating, typical genre, etc. I do like the typical genre statistic, or your typical genres, but like I kind of like what I was saying earlier, I would like to see what books fall into those specific genres, as to like why it's like my typical genre, you know? So this person goes on to say, I did transfer over my Goodreads info to give it a try. Has anyone used it before? I know Goodreads is powerful because it's owned by Amazon, but my main reason is just to track what books I'm reading and finding a book later when I'm overwhelmed at a store or library. I think Fable can do this. Would love to hear your thoughts. Okay, so I think if you're looking for something more social, Fable is the way to go. If you're not looking for something as social and are just strictly looking at tracking, Storygraph might be the safer bet, so you're not so overwhelmed with people's posts, because if you've marked something as read, let's say if you mark something as to read, you will get a lot of posts about that specific book, because you can post on it. If you mark something as currently reading, again, you will see a lot of posts about it. If you mark something as read, you will see a lot of posts and reviews about it. So, and posts including reviews. So it's just, if you don't want to be overwhelmed by the amount of books or amount of posts. So if you don't want to be overwhelmed with, sorry, I realized I was getting a headache, so I had to take some medicine. But if you don't want to be overwhelmed with the amount of posts related to books you've marked on your shelves in one capacity or another, Storygraph might be the safer bet to go. But if you don't mind that, if you prefer the social aspect, Fable might be the way to go. So one person commented saying, hey, if you want to keep track of your books, I suggest Storygraph. It lets you rate books in 25 star increments, 0.25 star increments, which Fable also does. I use Fable, Storygraph, and Goodreads. I use Storygraph to keep track of my books. It has a bunch of neat stats. I mostly use Fable to run my book club / follow other book clubs. I think it's a good social media app for book lovers and has a strong community, but I wouldn't recommend it to keep track of books. It's also good if you're looking for book recommendations, while Storygraph isn't. Yeah, that's also true, because it will like show you books kind of similar to what you've read, what you've marked as to read. Okay. And you can also export your Goodreads data into the Storygraph as well. I like that in the Storygraph you can mark a book as a DNF, so you're never going to finish it. If you're never going to finish, in that way, it's also not sitting on your currently reading list. And also it's not as if you're noting it as like never started it, but it's a way of noting that you started it but never finished it. Okay, you can also do that on Fable. I would like to try Storygraph, but I don't know. Another person says I would like to try Storygraph, but I don't know. I think Fable would be the best story tracking app for me, because not only does it have community, I'm part of a book club already, but I just use it to get book recommendations. I just can't seem to decide whether I should use Storygraph or Fable. So another person commented saying, I personally tried all three. My favorite is Fable. I just feel like it's the best blend of the other two, which, like, I respect, you know. Wow, this one was a long comment thingy. So yeah, the Storygraph is more oriented on the statistics of it. Anyway, so like it is just based on whether you want something more community based or something more statistic and just tracking based. So the other Reddit thread, which is Goodreads, Storygraph, or Fable. Am I bleeding? No. So this was from 10 months ago. And this person says Goodreads, Fable, or Storygraph. Now that it's 2025 and new reading goals are being set, which app are we using? So Goodreads is fine, but it is quite social. Don't love that it hasn't been updated in years. Yes, that's everyone's complaint. That was also like my thing too, where it's like it took a while for it to get updates. And the app isn't the best. Storygraph is not as social. Yeah, I like that you can easily add books / covers that are missing, but I find that it's not that user friendly. It's fine, but quite glitchy. I did notice some glitches like early on when I was using it, but that's since mellowed out. Fable, I didn't realize you could do TV shows as well, which is interesting. I don't plan to utilize it, but good to know. It just seems decent from the past couple of days of browsing. I've been using Goodreads for years, so any swap will change both other platforms. I can import data. So transferring everything isn't a concern, just minor flaws and whatnot. Do I need to switch apps? No, I've been using all three for days, which feels like a full-time job, just to touch out. I couldn't figure out if it was a burp or a cough, and it ended up being a cough. But so I've been using it. I've been using all three for days, which feels like a full-time job, but just to test out each of them. but there is no one winner. And I think Goodreads and Fable are kind of tied, and like I've said, it really depends on what you're looking for in a reading tracker app. And at the end of the day, I think most reading tracker apps have pulled ahead of Goodreads at the end of the day. So, yep. Someone else uses Romancio, romance.io, and a spreadsheets. Haven't tried Storygraph. Yeah, and both Fable and the Storygraph use AI generated prompts, but you can opt out of the ones on the Storygraph. Okay, would suggest Storygraph. I have 0 backup. Speaking from experience. Okay. Let's see. I use a Storygraph for the stats, Goodreads for social aspect and integration with my Kindles, and my vast infinite TBR is mostly romance on romance.io. I've never tried Fable since it doesn't have a website. It does have a website. It's just not very website friendly. It doesn't have a website, and I only use my computer for it. So another person commented saying, I love Storygraph. The app / site has been glitchy this week due to New Year's traffic. That's what the glitches were from, I think. Just like the influx of people like starting it and then inputting their reading goals and putting TBRs. So anyway, but typically speaking, it works very well with few issues. It's owned and run by Black women, and they are constantly adding features, making improvements, including social things. I really have been loving it lately. I love their new buddy read feature, which I think I mentioned. It makes read-alongs with my friend so much more so fun and entertaining. Let's see. Another person commented saying, and to add to the confusion, I went with Bookmori to track my books instead of Storygraph. I really like the calendar month function, seeing the book cover on the date I finish a book. And that's something that is sort of there on Fable, where it's like you can see parts of the covers in the specific month, and then the last one that you had marked as red for that specific month, you'll see most of the cover, but it's like not that specific thing. Since I mostly borrow audiobooks from the library, it gives me a lovely feeling of a bookcase full of favorite books does, and easy way to take notes. It also helps me keep track of my TBR, but I mostly just input audiobooks I purchased or pre-ordered in Audible, because Audible's personal library is awful and noticed. Yeah, I switched from Audible as well because again, we don't like Amazon, and I am largely using Libro FM now as my audiobook purchaser, and borrowing audiobooks I use Libby and Hoopla. So someone commented saying, I hate Goodreads. It infuriates me that Amazon, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, refuses to improve their user experience. However, I've been using it religiously for 10 plus years, and no other platform has provided anything better or not enough for me to switch. I won't try Fable after hearing about the AI fiasco, which they have improved, I'm pretty sure, and have fixed. And I tried Storygraph, but didn't enjoy it. Goodreads is the most seamless option at this point. If Letterboxd ever gets into the book game, I'd switch in a heartbeat, though. So, yeah. So Fable quickly took it down and apologized for the AI issues. I'd rather support smaller companies than Amazon, even if they'd messed up once. You can't easily control what AI will pull up. I encourage you to reconsider. So yeah, it's like it really depends on like what you're looking for, and if you are concerned about any AI issues, like I mentioned, Storygraph, you can opt out of it. Fable has resolved it. And I think with the Storygraph, the more people that opt out of it and don't use that, the more that they'll see like, okay, they're not liking the AI feature. So that's, oh boy. Yeah, so that's the end of the day. And like I've said a few times, it really just depends on what you're looking for. So if you've used any of the, if you use any of these book tracking apps that either I've talked about personally or that were mentioned in some of the Reddit threads, comment down below with your thoughts about them, because I'd love to hear more about it. And if you have any thoughts or opinions about this, please comment down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.